actually sold by the Village of Painted Post to fracking operations across the border in Pennsylvania. And when you pull a lot of water out of an aquifer that's connected to a really complex hydrological cycle, there are health impacts, not only for the people at Painted Post, but also for people downstream in the city and municipality of Corning. And there are also environmental impacts. So what's really unique about this area is that it's a place where four rivers all come together and form a big confluence. And underneath those four rivers, which form a kind of X, are X-shaped aquifers, and they exist in reciprocity with the surface water above them. And that's really unusual because I study a lot of hydrological cycles as an ecologist, and typically groundwater discharges into surface water. Groundwater is the mother of rivers and streams. But in this case, they move back and forth between each other. They're almost like breathing in and out. And so if you pull a lot of water out of the aquifer to sell for fracking operations across the border, you're pulling water in from other parts of the aquifer, but also from the surface water. And some parts of the Corning Aquifer, as we've learned today, are actually contaminated by previous industrial operations. And right now, that contaminated water is not affecting the water that people drink. But if we start moving that water all around because we're sucking water out and selling it across the border, we're actually removing it from the hydrological cycle, we can actually pull those contaminants into where we're drawing for people's drinking water. And then there are health impacts from that. So our message today is really to local elected officials that before they, like right now we're protected by the courts. So there's been a kind of injunction on this water sale. By pushing the pause button, we now have time to really study the issue and make a smart decision based on science and knowledge. So there are studies that need to be done, and elected officials that need to very seriously and soberly take a look at these models and do the right thing. And they are in charge of safeguarding the public health and the well-being, not only for current Corning and Painted Post residents, but for all the children and generations to come. And they need to make a wise decision based on good science. And so what we're here to talk about is what should that study look at and what kind of data would be necessary so that when we make a good decision about whether to resume or prohibit these water sales, it's not simply flying in the dark, but it's really informed by science. This is not a time to be, hear no evil, see no evil. So it's really good that there are some local elected officials in there who are really learning about what the risks are, how the hydrological cycle works, because underneath our feet here in Corning lies a really complicated ecological system. All of us are 65% water by weight, so anyone who lives here is this aquifer, and a lot depends on it.
Okay. And you're talking about some of those smart decisions, those wise decisions that could come out of forums like this and informing the public and looking at the science. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you think would be a wise way to use this water? What should be done with the water?
Well, the decision is really the people's to make, and their local elected officials in the area. My hope as a biologist in the public interest is to bring some good science to bear. I think science can be a kind of flashlight to light up some of the dark corners so that when the decisions are made as to what this water should do, whose purposes should it serve, how do we best safeguard it for current residents and future generations, that we don't end up making a terrible, unfixable mistake. And my own interest in this all really began as a young biologist when I myself lived in a town in Illinois where there was a reckless decision made and drinking water was contaminated. I became a young cancer patient and became one data point in a large cluster of cancers. And so and then I went years later and went back and researched all that. But there's really, so we're doing a lot of monitoring about the drinking water that was contaminated in my hometown, but there's no way to fix it. So when you're faced with a decision where if you make a mistake, the consequences are irreparable and people's lives could be wrecked, then you really, precaution is really the watchword. And I think good decisions are made with good science. And so what we're hearing as part of this forum is what do we know so far? And it turns out that the models that have been developed so far are out of date. They were done when computers were much slower and could rely on, and you could only have so many variables at one time, and they were actually presuming a different part of the river than where the current pumping station is located. And so what we need is to develop much better models and have better data to offer our elected officials as they move forward. So the good news here is that you know, when we want to choose to do something like, let's say, roll out a new car, we don't actually have to crash the car with real people in it. We can use crash test dummies as simulation models to determine where the safety problems are and then make it safer. So hydrological models are like crash test dummies that we can use ahead of time before the decisions are made to see where the problems are. And sometimes the problems are so serious we decide this just really can't go forward. You know, at some point we decided you can't smoke in airplanes. There's no way to put air filtration systems good enough to protect people's health. And so we simply had to say, you know, we're not doing that anymore. And it may turn out that selling water across the border for fracking operations is just something we decide is not a good future for painted post. That's how it looks to me as a biologist, from the data I'm familiar with. But this is for the people here to make a decision on.